Hey, greetings, everyone. Lieutenant Colonel Alan West, Senior Fellow at the Media Research Center. Tomorrow it begins. Only for the third time in the history of the United States of America, we will have an impeachment of a president. The articles of impeachment have been sent over to the Senate, and they will begin their trial process. As we know, Supreme Court Justice Roberts was sworn in, and the senators understand their responsibility as jurors. But there's a real interesting question that I'd like to pose here in America. Who gets to define what an abuse of power is? Because one of those two articles of impeachment is that the President of the United States of America, Donald J. Trump, abused his power. And I'm trying to reconcile myself and understand that, of course, one of the other articles was that he obstructed Congress in doing their job. Well, I remember being in Congress and an attorney general by the name of Eric Holder was obstructing us looking into a thing called Operation Fast and Furious. Eric Holder was held in contempt.
The committee meets today to consider reporting a resolution to the House of Representatives finding the Attorney General Eric Holder Jr. in contempt of Congress.
The Obama administration issued all of these executive privilege orders, so we couldn't get to the bottom of what was going on. And think about Operation Fast and Furious. This was something that was created in the Obama administration, a gun walking scheme that ended up with the death of a United States Border Patrol agent. But I guess that's not an impeachable offense because we were just told there's nothing there. See, the hypocrisy that I see happening now is that the progressive socialist left always get to define the narrative. They always get to set the talking points. They always get to, well, tell us what an abuse of power is. Think about this. President Barack Hussein Obama, and he said, I have a pen and I have a phone, and I will take executive action.
I've got a pen and I've got a phone, and I can use that pen to sign executive orders and take executive actions and administrative actions that move the ball forward.
And all of these people that so solemnly marched over to the United States Senate, well, they were cheering and clapping. I didn't hear Nancy Pelosi. I didn't hear Chuck Schumer. I didn't hear Adam Schiff, Gerald Nadler, Maxine Waters. I didn't hear any of them say that's an abuse of power. Because we here in the legislative branch, we operate by establishing and passing legislation, and we send it over to you for your signature for it to become law. You don't get to rule over us. You must govern. And we have this thing called the Constitution, which sets enumerated powers. But Barack Obama did not listen. Barack Obama did not care. Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer said nothing. And he went forward with a thing called the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, DACA. And what was so interesting is that President Obama admitted in a speech that he really could not take that action unilaterally.
Now, I know some people want me to bypass Congress and change the laws on my own. Believe me. And believe me, right now dealing with Congress, the idea but believe me, the idea of doing things on my own is very tempting. I promise you, not just on immigration reform. But that's not how our system works. That's not how our democracy functions.
But in the end, he took that action unilaterally. An abuse of power. Because the Constitution that I know and read in Article 1 says that in matters of naturalization, citizenship, and things of this, it's an enumerated power to the United States Congress, not to the executive branch. But I guess that's not an abuse of power in the United States of America. Nor would it be an abuse of power to, well, unleash the power of a government agency, the Internal Revenue Service, against constitutional conservative grassroots movements here in the United States of America. We do not need to debate the fact of whether or not it was done. It was done. As a matter of fact, Lois Lerner has now gone on, retired, six-figure income, paid by the United States taxpayer. That's her retirement. She could just plead the fifth and walk away.
I've been advised by my counsel to assert my constitutional right not to testify or answer questions related to the subject matter of this hearing. After very careful consideration, I've decided to follow my counsel's advice and not testify or answer any of the questions today.
But what about that abuse of power? That you would focus the government and its power against just citizens. See, the thing is that as long as it aligns with the ideological agenda of the left, they don't consider it an abuse of power. Donald Trump is guilty of obstructing Congress from going and attacking him. That really does anger them. But the real abuse of power is that they didn't win the White House. And so, as we continue to hear them say, they will continuously seek to impeach the president because they want that power. But it's not just what we see up in Washington, D.C. The abuse of power by the progressive socialist left has no bounds whatsoever. Recently, Texas Governor Greg Abbott made the decision that Texas would no longer accept any more refugees for resettlement. The President of the United States of America granted the ability to these sovereign state governors to be able to make that decision. And now a federal judge in Maryland is telling Texas State Governor Abbott he can't do that. To me, that's an abuse of power. It's an abuse of power just the same as what we see happening in Virginia right now with Governor Ralph Northam, the old blackface.
I darkened my face.
Ask yourself, how many Republican governors or attorney generals would still be in place if we found pictures of them in blackface? That's an abuse of power. But now so many people are taken to the streets to march on Richmond because here you have a Democrat governor, state house and state senate, that for no other reason than their ideological agenda want to undermine and take away the Second Amendment right, the constitutional right, the second right in our Bill of Rights from citizens in Virginia. But I guess that's not an abuse of power. Governor Northam is laughing at the fact that now I believe 90 to 95 of the 95 counties in Virginia have declared themselves sanctuary counties for the Second Amendment. But yet we see states and cities declaring themselves sanctuaries for criminal and illegal immigrants. But that's not an abuse of power. Even here in the city of Houston, not too long ago, Mayor Annice Parker subpoenaed the sermons of pastors because they were speaking out against her abuse of power, which would have forced them to do things in their churches, in their bathrooms, that were against their faith. See, the abuse of power is happening all over the United States of America. And mainly, it's the progressive socialist left that is doing it, being aided by a very complicit media. Thank God we have the Media Research Center that evidences that on a continuous and constant basis. But if we allow the left to continue to define the narrative, to set the conditions, to tell us what an abuse of power is, this political hypocrisy that has gone on far too long, we could lose this constitutional republic. If I were the Senate Majority Leader, I would have stood at a press conference and said exactly what I just explained here. To set the conditions and explain what an abuse of power really is, and how the abuses of power by the progressive socialist left are always dismissed. And then, in a very solemn manner, I would have stood before the cameras and ripped apart the articles of impeachment that Nancy Pelosi and the partisan House Democrats sent over to the United States Senate. Sure, they'll throw a fit, they'll go into an apoplectic rage, but they do anyhow. It's time for us to define. It's time for us to set the narrative. It's time for us to tell them that we know what the definition of an abuse of power is in these United States of America.